Talking Nebraska football here at the voice of college football, and I can't think of a better landing spot than this guy. He's the voice of the Huskers there on the Nebraska Radio Network. Greg Sharpe joining us today. Appreciate, Greg, your time and you being here to talk some Husker football with us.
Mark, it's great to be with you. Just got off the practice field. Watched the Huskers go through a workout this morning, and a lot of people here excited about Matt Rhule being the new football coach of the Cornhuskers.
Oh, you read my mind. Yes, because this time of year, Nebraska fans are undaunted, I believe, based on my interactions with them about what's happened the last 5 or 6 years, regardless. It's a new spring. It's a new fall coming up. Hey, we're hopeful. We're optimistic. But with Matt Rhule now in place, that has to be magnified 10 times.
To resilient fan base, they've had to be over the last decade because they've not had much success. And I think what's been missing is a guy like Matt that's really detail oriented. He's a micromanager, but I kind of think that's what's needed at this place. Nebraska has been so close. Mark, here's a really interesting number. The last 2 years, year and a half under Scott Frost, and then the finish of the 2022 season with an interim head coach, Nebraska played 15 of their 24 games that were decided by one score or less. And they went 2-13. Well, to me, that says you're missing the little things, the minor things. And that's attention to detail in my eyes in a lot of ways. I think Matt Rhule checks that box in a big way. My short time around him since he took the job in late November is that he is very much concerned about all the little things in the program. And I think that'll prove to be a turning point for Nebraska football moving down the road.
Yeah, when you were competitive with the likes of Ohio State, Michigan State, when they were a top 10 team, and you're doing it repeatedly, it's not just a one-off each season where there's some lower level teams in a particular conference going to jump up and scare one of the better teams, but week after week after week after week, Oklahoma, of course, 2 years ago as well, then that tells you something there, the final couple drives of the game, that maybe some details were missed, but the team is just about good enough to make some things happen. Want to get into your background as well, Greg. You grew up in the Kansas City area, correct?
I did, yes.
So what was your sports fandom like as a kid?
I was a big Chiefs fan, so I've really enjoyed the last several years, Mark. They've been so fun to watch. But yeah, I remember going to my first Chiefs game in 1970, and this was pre-Arrowhead Stadium. This was when they played at an old ballpark called Municipal Stadium that was also the home of the Royals at that time. And so they would convert the field to a football stadium. So that was my first experience of doing that. And then I loved sports from that moment on. And I knew I wasn't a great enough athlete to be a professional athlete of any type. So I thought I can get in this broadcasting business. Had nobody in my family that did that. And from about age 7 on, I knew I wanted to be in sports, being a sportscaster, and kind of geared all of my schooling and high school and college to that end. And I've been lucky enough to have a pretty fun career over the last 25 years.
When I think about play-by-play announcers that I believe are the best in the business, and they're not necessarily the biggest names, but just who resonates with any individual fan or with myself, there's more than one way to get the job done. It's not like everyone that I enjoy and appreciate has the same style. You can be effective in various ways. So how did you develop your style and your approach?
I listened to a lot of different people. I would spend my Saturday afternoons not out playing with my buddies, but I would be locked in my bedroom, a couple of radios going, TVs going, and I was doing my own scoreboard show. So I picked from a lot of different people that I could grow up listening to. And I think you can't mimic one particular person. You need to kind of put it together and then make it your own. Do your own thing. The other day I was calling some Husker baseball, and we're playing Illinois, and their broadcaster came in and he looked at how I was scoring the game, and he goes, "That's interesting how you do that kind of a different way." And I go, "I think you have to create your own niche, do what works for you, and go with it from there on." And I tell young broadcasters all the time, don't try to be the next Bob Uecker. Don't try to be the next whoever. Be yourself. You can take from somebody else and hear something and go, "I like how they did that," and use that, incorporate that into what you want to do. But if you try to mimic somebody else, it's not going to work because that person's already established themselves. So I've picked from a lot of different people down through the years and just tried to kind of create my own style.
Every time I talk to a prominent play-by-play broadcaster, they say the same exact thing. Yes, we're all influenced and need to soak up and absorb from our surroundings and our backgrounds from the very best. But if you're not yourself and you're not authentic, then it's not going to work. It's going to be obvious.
The audience will pick that out, right? I mean, the audience will be the ones that go, that isn't real. That's not authentic at all. That guy's trying to be something else. And so I think they're a great judge of that. I had an internship, Mark, when I was in college at a television station in Kansas City. And the great Kevin Harlan was coming in to do a weekend cast. He lived in the Kansas City area at that time. And so I was producing and getting his stuff together. And he gave me a great piece of advice. He said, Greg, always know your audience. If your audience is a national audience, broadcast that way. If your audience is a fan of a particular team, broadcast that way. And so I've kind of carried that bit of advice with me down through the years.
So you graduated from Kansas State, worked there as play-by-play announcer there. Your mother is an alma mater, an alum of Nebraska, correct?
She is. Yeah. I tell people all the time, my mom went to Nebraska. My dad was a Kansas Jayhawk. And I tell people you mix red and blue, you get purple. So that's how I ended up. Actually, my older brother went to Kansas State, and I'd go up and visit him and had a great time. And so I kind of forged my path there. And then I was able to jump in to schooling and get a part of the K-State radio network at that time. Mitch Holtis was their play-by-play guy. And then when he went to do the Chiefs full-time in 1995, it opened the door for me to get my foot in the door and call K-State football and basketball. And what a great era. I did 6 years with the Wildcats, and Bill Snyder was really getting things cranked up in Manhattan. Did a couple of Cotton Bowls, a Fiesta Bowl there at K-State. And then part of the business, Mark, is that you've got to deal with the business side of things. And Kansas State went through a rights holder change, and the new rights holder decided we kind of want our own voice. We want to go a different direction. And I was out, and that was tough. That was a hard era for me, because here I am doing my games for my alma mater, loving life. K-State football was near the top of the heap in the country, and then boom, it gets pulled out from underneath you. I think a lot of us in the business have experienced those kind of moments. Not much fun. You learn from it. You kind of go back on yourself, and do you believe enough in yourself that something else will come along? And I did. I knew something else would probably pop for me. And then when the Nebraska position opened up, it was a no-brainer to move to Lincoln and be a part of this great fan base and the passion that Nebraska fans have for their team. And so very grateful to be in Lincoln, and have been since 2008.
So, Greg, you point something out that's always interesting to me, and I have to explain to people that ask me about my career journey, because you were fortunate enough, I was as well, to turn what was a passion into a lifelong career. And so, for example, being at ESPN for as long as I was, 19 years, you tear yourself away from being a fan. You got to get the job done. And we were just rooting for working in programming for so long, rooting for games to get off the air, regardless of who wins the games, because we don't want to tear through the programming schedule tonight. Just get the game off on time, kind of thing. And I would just witness people that were ardent fans of particular teams just being like, okay, let's just get the game over with, regardless of the outcome. So, you let us know how that break from Kansas State football came about. I wasn't aware of that, because I was going to say a lot of fans are so entrenched in their fandom, and that's rightfully so, that they wonder, okay, a Kansas State play-by-play guy, and then he flips the switch, and now he's calling games for Nebraska. How does that work?
It was not real easy. It helped actually when Nebraska changed leagues, because a lot of Nebraska fans were, I think, hesitant to wrap their arms around me, because I'd been the enemy's broadcaster for a while at K-State. And I think the change to the Big Ten, I think, alleviated a lot of that. But it took me several years to kind of earn the trust and the faith of the Nebraska fan base. I left Kansas State, or I was no longer doing Kansas State, I guess is probably the proper way to put it, in 2002. So I had a 6-year gap in there. And what happened in the interim, as I knew somebody on the Nebraska Athletic Department staff, and they were putting together a third-tier TV deal with Fox Sports Midwest to do basketball. And one day I got a call and said, we need a guy to call some basketball. Would you do that? And I said, absolutely, because I had a television background as well. And so I came up here and did about 8 to 10 basketball games for about the next 4 years. And that kind of got my foot in the door with the Nebraska fan base. They saw me do that. And Mark, you'll remember these days. In that era, in the late 2000s, a lot of pay-per-view games were going on. So I would do one or two football games that were pay-per-view. People would write a check or whatever for $29.99 to watch the Huskers play the Maine Black Bears or somebody like that. And so I was doing some of those games. And then when the opportunity opened up and presented itself in late 2007 to get the full-time job, I leapt at it to move to Nebraska and be a part of this great, proud program.
You bring up the conclusion of the run in the Big 12 for Nebraska and then moving on to the Big 10. And of course, you were right there front and center calling the games. And I find it intriguing to see the journey of Nebraska football from the heydays of the late 90s. They were still competitive, of course, nationally, went to a Rose Bowl to play for a national championship in 2001. Then they had some rocky years. Then they rebound under Bo Pelini, play for those final two Big 12 championships and take them right down to the wire. 3-point loss to Oklahoma. And then, of course, the infamous 1 second on the clock against Texas. Just take us through the agony, but also just calling the games on the big stage there at the end of the run in the Big 12.
Yeah. Hurts. The 1 second with Texas was really hard to stomach because you felt like the game was over. I called it like it was over because you got guys running out on the field. You're looking at the clock, it says 0. So you're declaring Nebraska the Big 12 champions. You're going to go to the Fiesta Bowl. And then all of a sudden you see officials' hands wave and go, wait a minute, we still have some time. We have 1 more second left on that. That was a really, really tough pill to swallow. And very appropriate then, Mark, the next year for Nebraska's final game as a member of the Big 12 to be against Oklahoma, their longtime rivals. And that was a terrific football game as well. Oklahoma was really good. Huskers got out to a 17-0 lead, couldn't hang on. And then it's been fun to learn the traditions and go to the venues of the Big Ten Conference and to absorb all that this league has to offer, all the tradition, all the trophy games. That was one big adjustment for us, making the move from the Big 12 to the Big 10, all the trophy games that they have in this league. So that's been a lot of fun to kind of go and go to Ohio State and go to the Big House and go to Beaver Stadium and see Penn State, although Nebraska has played Penn State quite a bit down through the years. But to do all that was really fun for me to kind of venture out into that avenue. And I think for Husker fans as well, it's taken the full 10, 12 years for this fan base to kind of feel like they belong in this conference. They don't have the close proximities to the Lawrences and the Manhattans and the Ames, Iowas that they did in the Big 12. They've got to travel further to go watch their team play. So it's taken a good decade to kind of make that feel like it's a new home.
We're enjoying the conversation and honored to be joined by Greg Sharpe here, voice of the Huskers, Nebraska Radio Network. And you know better than I do, and I hear from Nebraska fans every day, but you're inundated with it in regards to the thought process of exactly what you're talking about, the transformation and transition from the Big 12 to the Big 10. And it's almost split based on the feedback I receive in regards to whether this was a good thing or a not so good thing. But we know that it's just different for sure.
It's different. And I think the security blanket of the Big 10 became pretty evident. I'm losing track of my time. Was it 2-3 years ago that the announcement that OU and Texas were leaving the Big 12? And I think Nebraska fans at that moment go, aha, that was an aha moment. Like, okay, now we're not having to worry about all that drama that's going on south of us. And that was part of the issue for Nebraska to go looking at the Big 10 was that there's so much drama around Texas and the Longhorn network that came up that gave them a big advantage at that point in time. And I think that ruffled some feathers. And I think that moment in time is when a lot of Husker fans said, yeah, okay, now I get it. Now I see why this was a really good move back in 2011 to make the jump to the Big Ten Conference. We don't have to worry about that instability. We don't have to worry about whether we're going to still be a part of a power conference. That's taken care of. We'll never have to worry about that again as long as we're a member of this conference.
Greg, I guess on one hand, you have to just kind of let tradition go to a certain extent and say, hey, I've got no control over it. Do I still enjoy the game on the field if I do? Because on one level, USC and UCLA coming to the Big Ten to me is fascinating. It is fascinating to think about USC and UCLA visiting a Memorial Stadium on a regular basis and going on to the great venues within the Big Ten. But do I really like what's going on across the nation? Because when I think college football in the heyday that we grew up in, of course, there's a regionality to it. It's the fabric of not just the games, but the values, the lifestyles, the music, the food, the everything that comes from those various parts of the country that make it so interesting to compare and contrast.
Totally agree. And it's been hard for me. I'm a traditionalist. Growing up, the best day of the year for me was New Year's Day because I could sit there and watch bowl game after bowl game after bowl game, big name teams on big stages. And that's kind of getting ripped away from us. I mean, the fact that KU and Missouri don't play anymore, the fact that Texas and Texas A&M have taken a break, now that's going to get put back together with the Longhorns move to the SEC, just seems really odd to me. And then when the announcement came out last summer about USC UCLA, you're like, holy cow, this is literally, it's now a coast-to-coast conference. It's really a smaller version of the NFL is what the Big Ten has become with the addition of the two Los Angeles schools into the mix of this thing. And the powers to be are currently struggling right now to how to schedule this thing. What are they going to do? They're going to go to pods. I think the divisions are completely going to be gone from the Big Ten moving forward. But how do they schedule this thing out and incorporate those two schools? And is that it? Is that the end of the growth, the realignment for this conference? My gut says probably not. I think there's probably still going to be more that got brought into that. What gets lost is all those wonderful traditional games that we've seen down through the years. And part of me still aches for some of that to happen. But it's not going to go back. The genie's out of the bottle. We're not going to go backwards and put it all back together. I'd like to think maybe in 10, 15 years, somebody goes, you know what are we doing flying all these teams all over the place? Let's kind of just set up pockets of people. And maybe you have to cross organized conferences to make that work. And maybe a Minnesota plays a Kansas, and then you get it back to where it's kind of, but I don't think that's probably the direction we're headed.
Yeah, I really think the root of the problem is that there's no commissioner or governing body to put it all together. The NFL does everything for the good of the entire NFL. It's not like the AFC North makes decisions for itself. The commissioner of the SEC, the Big Ten, all the commissioners, they are working for their conference. They're not working for the good of college football, and rightfully so.
Exactly right. They're about what's best financially for our institutions and what's best for exposure and all those type of things. And the fan kind of gets forgotten a little bit about this thing. And hey, that's just the way it is. We've known for decades that it's big business. And now with the transfer portal and NIL being added into the mix, it's really become a strange time for college athletics. Maybe not good or bad, but just a different time for all of us to get used to.
So, Greg, as these future formatting structure the conference gets worked out and the schedules, obviously the Big Ten threw Iowa and Nebraska together, and it made sense. Black Friday, and obviously some view that as, yes, that's a rivalry. It totally makes sense for a number of reasons that we could easily list, but also it has that feel that, is this truly a rivalry? Do you think that game gets protected? What games do you think for Nebraska should be protected?
That's the one. That's the one that needs to be protected for that. And because Nebraska is the westernmost current Big Ten team, I would guess that you're going to see Nebraska play one, if not both, of the Los Angeles schools on a yearly basis in football. I do think they're looking strongly at a pod system where you get 4 teams and you play those 3 every year, and then you mix the other groups and rotate them through so that if you're a fifth-year senior, you've played and lined up across the field from everybody else in the conference. I don't have any inside knowledge. The athletic directors don't confide in me and tell me what they're working on, but what I've read through some of the tea leaves, I think that's the direction they're going. And they're going to have to figure this out. 2024 is not very far away when USC and UCLA join the league. But I think the one thing that Nebraska will have protected will be that Black Friday rivalry with the Hawkeyes.
And finally, Greg, you're going to be able to encapsulate this much better than me. And obviously you're in the heart of it. I see it from a distance. I've entered the state of Nebraska twice, and that was for 2 College World Series. That was not for football, but I know as a big college football guy for years and years and years, there just seems to be something different, meaning that Florida State's been down, and I know they've got a huge fan base and they love their team, but you see empty seats. You see apathy at places like Tennessee and other spots that have been down. Sure, again, I don't want to discredit the fan bases because they're amazing, but there is something about the loyalty of this fan base.
There is, and they've been tested, but we've still sold it out for every game since 1962, and I don't think that won't change this year. Obviously, with the energy that Coach Rural has brought with him into the program, there's no pro sports. This state's identity is hooked and tied to Nebraska football, and that's never going to change. So, when you have that component, and you have at least a coaching staff that this fan base right now likes a lot, because they've really done a good job ingraining themselves in this state since taking over in late November. That's going to continue to go. You brought up those programs. I kind of call it the late 90s fallout. As you go back, Virginia Tech was so good in the late 90s. They've fallen on a hard time. Florida State had a really good year this year, and hopefully that continues. And Tennessee was the other one. Those four schools have kind of hit the skids for the last decade plus. But I think all four can get themselves back up. Tennessee certainly had a great year this past year, and Florida State had a very good year. So Nebraska's hoping they're kind of following the trend of the Volunteers and the Seminoles.
Greg Sharpe, voice of the Huskers, Nebraska Radio Network. Greg, I think you understand that you have a role as a play-by-play announcer, but certainly as the Nebraska play-by-play announcer that a lot of people covet, that a lot of people would love to have, but they just don't have your pipes and your ability to get it done. So, well, we appreciate you stopping by for sure.
Well, Mark, not a day goes by that I don't thank my lucky stars. I'm really blessed to have this job, and it's one of the great fan bases in the country. Again, with that sellout streak and the passion they have for this, and being in Lincoln, Nebraska on a fall Saturday is a pretty cool place to be, and I'm going to hang on to that as long as I can.
And Greg, if I would have done a better job at structuring this interview, I would have thought of this a few minutes ago. So it's not necessarily a great way to end it, but I have to get this in. It's got to be interesting to you in this day and age of social media that for those folks that don't catch the radio broadcasts, your voice, your calls are splattered all over these hype reels and these highlights that people catch on a regular basis, even more so in this day and age of highlight reel intake, more so than ever.
Mark, there's one Husker fan that goes and matches up after every game, matches up our broadcast with the TV pictures, and he tweets it out and puts it out on different various social media platforms every week. And God bless him. I've never met him. We've conversed via Twitter and those type of things in the past, but he does that after every football game, goes and puts our broadcast together. It's kind of a kick to see some of the responses we get.
Absolutely. Greg, thanks so much for stopping by. It was a joy to talk to you.
I enjoyed it, Mark. Thanks anytime.